Richard had gone out to run some errands, and I was at home with Caleb, just enjoying a peaceful day. I left him in the living room for just a few minutes while I went to the kitchen to grab a bottle. But when I came back, Caleb was gone. My heart stopped. I searched the entire house, calling his name, but he was nowhere to be found. Panic set in as I realized that Emma and Lily were also missing. I called Richard, my voice shaking with fear. We called both of our families, the police, everyone we could think of. Hours passed, and still, no sign of Caleb or the girls. And then, my phone rang. The man on the other end of the line told me he has my son.
I have your baby. I'll send you the address now. Come as quickly as possible. Don't be scared. I don't want anything from you. I'm only helping you.
Hi, my name is Sharon, and I married Richard, who already had 2 daughters with his late wife. From the first time I met Emma and Lily, I knew there would be trouble. It wasn't just the glares they shot in my direction, the way their voices dropped to a whisper when I walked into a room, or how unfairly they treated me. Their father, Richard, was oblivious, or perhaps hopeful that things would smooth over with time. But I knew better. There was something more than simple dislike in their eyes. There was a deep-rooted hatred that I couldn't quite understand. They had lost their mother years before I met them, and I suppose in some ways, I was an unwelcome reminder that life was moving on. I tried to be understanding, tried to win them over with kindness, but it seemed the more I tried, the worse things became. At first, it was small things. Emma would forget to set a place for me at the dinner table. Lily would take my clothes from the laundry and dump them on the floor. I brushed it off, telling myself that they just needed time. But with every passing day, their efforts to drive me out became more calculated, more malicious. They weren't just trying to get under my skin, they were trying to break me. Their father, Richard, tried his best to discipline them. He would scold them when they were rude, ground them when they disobeyed, but it was as if nothing he said or did could change their minds about me. They wanted me gone, and no amount of punishment could sway them. It wore me down. I began to feel like I was walking on eggshells in my own home, constantly watching what I said and did, always on guard for the next cruel trick or hurtful remark. I tried to hide it, to be strong, but the stress was eating away at me. Soon enough, I started having panic attacks, those terrifying moments when it felt like the world was closing in, and I couldn't breathe. My hands would shake, and my heart would race, my mind spinning with anxiety about what they might do next. Richard was supportive, but I could tell it was tearing him apart. He loved his daughters, but he could see what they were doing to me. He suggested therapy, and though I was reluctant at first, I finally agreed. I needed help, anything to ease the suffocating anxiety that had taken over my life. But even therapy couldn't prepare me for what was to come. After a year of marriage, I became pregnant with our son, and that's when the real nightmare began. Emma and Lily were furious when they found out. It was as if my pregnancy was the ultimate betrayal. They didn't say much at first, just stared at my growing belly with cold, hostile eyes, but their actions spoke louder than words. They tried again and again to make me fall. They would leave things lying on the stairs, push past me a little too forcefully in the hallway, and leave puddles of water on the kitchen floor. But luck was on my side. I never fell, never got hurt, and I carried my baby to full term. When I finally gave birth to my son, Caleb, I thought things might change. I thought that seeing their baby brother might soften them, might make them see me as something more than the woman who had stolen their father. But I was wrong. They didn't even congratulate me. They just stared at Caleb like he was something dirty, something they didn't want in their lives. Richard tried to talk to them, tried to get them to bond with their new brother, but they wouldn't listen. Their hatred for me had transferred to Caleb, and I was terrified of what they might do. 3 months later, my worst fears came true. It was a quiet afternoon. Richard had gone out to run some errands, and I was at home with Caleb, just enjoying a peaceful day. I left him in the living room for just a few minutes while I went to the kitchen to grab a bottle. But when I came back, Caleb was gone. My heart stopped. I searched the entire house, calling his name, but he was nowhere to be found. Panic set in as I realized that Emma and Lily were also missing. I called Richard, my voice shaking with fear, and he rushed home immediately. We called both of our families, the police, everyone we could think of. Hours passed, and still, no sign of Caleb or the girls. And then, my phone rang. The man on the other end of the line told me he has my son.
I have your baby. I'll send you the address now. Come as quickly as possible. Don't be scared. I don't want anything from you. I'm only helping you.
I could barely breathe. He sent me an address. Richard and I didn't waste a second. We drove to the address, an old-looking building on the outskirts of town. My hands were trembling as we pulled up. When we walked into the building, we found Emma and Lily tied to 2 chairs, their faces bruised and bloodied. Caleb was nearby, lying in a crib, crying softly. The man who had called us stood in the corner, arms crossed. He was tall and rough-looking, but there was something about him that seemed familiar.
Sharon? Right. I figured it was you.
I stared at him, trying to remember his face. And then it clicked. He was the man I had helped a few years ago, back when he had been homeless. I had found him on the street, freezing in the winter cold, and had helped him get an apartment. I hadn't seen him since, but we had kept in touch briefly after that.
They came to me, these girls, said they wanted to sell the kid. I recognized them from your Facebook photos. You know, the ones with your stepdaughters. They didn't know I knew you, so I played along at first. But when I told them I wasn't going to help, they tried to fight me. I had to rough them up a bit and tie them down until you got here.
Richard's face was a mask of disbelief. He looked at his daughters, tied to those chairs, bruised and beaten, and I could see the devastation in his eyes. Richard's first instinct was to call the police. He didn't care if his daughters ended up in jail. After what they had done, after the fear they had caused, he was ready to see them punished. But I stopped him. I wasn't interested in sending them to prison. That wasn't the solution. Prison wouldn't make them understand the depth of their betrayal. It wouldn't heal the damage they had caused, or change the way they viewed me or Caleb. No, I had a different punishment in mind. Something that would make them face the consequences of their actions in a way that prison never could. We took Caleb home that night, and I packed the girls' bags myself. I didn't say a word to them as I folded their clothes, packed up their belongings, and set their suitcases by the door. They didn't deserve an explanation. They knew what they had done. When Richard asked what I planned to do, I told him. The next day, we sent Emma and Lily away. Not to juvenile detention, not to a facility for troubled teens, but to a place that would make them confront their hatred head-on. We enrolled them in a boarding school for troubled youth, one that specialized in reforming kids who had gone down dark paths, just like Emma and Lily. It was strict, with a no-nonsense approach to discipline. But more than that, it was a place where they would be forced to interact with other kids who had suffered far more than they ever had. They would be surrounded by children who had been abandoned, abused, neglected. Children who had lost everything. And they would be forced to face the fact that, despite their privileged lives, they had tried to destroy the one good thing they had left, which is their family. The school had a strict no-contact policy for the first 6 months. Emma and Lily would have no access to phones, no visits from family, no connection to the outside world. They would be isolated, forced to reflect on their actions, and given intensive counseling to help them work through their hatred and resentment. It wasn't prison, but in many ways, it was worse. They couldn't hide behind their father's love, couldn't manipulate their way out of consequences. They were alone, left to face themselves and the damage they had caused. For 6 months, we didn't hear from them. Richard struggled with the silence, but he knew it was necessary. He knew that if they ever came home, they needed to be different. They needed to understand the depth of their cruelty and take responsibility for their actions. When the 6 months were up, we visited the school. I didn't know what to expect, whether they would have changed or whether they would still harbor the same resentment. But when we arrived, I saw it in their eyes. They were different. They weren't broken, but they were humbled. The hatred they had once directed at me seemed to have faded, replaced by something like shame. They couldn't look me in the eye, couldn't meet my gaze without flinching. For the first time, they apologized.
You've been so nice to us, yet all we've ever done is be rude and unfair to you. We're so sorry, Sharon.
Yeah, Emma had said it all. We
We're sorry. Please forgive us.
It wasn't a perfect apology, and I knew there was still a long way to go, but it was a start. We brought them home, but things were never the same. They would never be the same. The walls that had been built between us over the years were thick, and despite their apologies, I knew it would take more than words to fix the damage they had done. Emma and Lily were quiet when they came home. They didn't try to cause trouble anymore, didn't look for ways to push my buttons or undermine me. They were polite but distant, as though they were afraid to get too close. I could see the guilt weighing on them, especially when they looked at Caleb. He had been the innocent victim in all of this, and now that they were back, they seemed to understand that. Richard and I worked hard to rebuild our family, but the scars left behind were deep. There were times when I wondered if it would have been easier to send the girls away for good, to cut ties and start fresh without them in our lives. But I couldn't do that. Not to Richard and not to the girls. They were still his daughters, and despite everything they had done, he loved them. Therapy became a regular part of our lives. Richard and I went together, while Emma and Lily attended their own sessions. It was hard work, and there were days when I didn't think we would make it. But slowly, things began to change. Emma was the first to open up. One night, while I was sitting in the living room with Caleb asleep on my lap, she came in and sat down beside me. At first, she didn't say anything, just stared at the floor. But after a long silence, she finally spoke.
I'm sorry. I don't know why I hated you so much. I thought you were trying to replace our mom.
Sweetheart, I was not trying to replace her. I never wanted to. I just wanted to love your dad, and to love you and Lily too. She was in tears now.
Yes, I know that now. But I didn't back then. I was just so angry.
I understand, and I forgive you. We hugged, and then Lily also came and joined us after apologizing too. Our family soon became that happy one I always wanted, and I couldn't be happier. Thanks for watching.